And I'm Jordan Rego, a member of the District 6 Political Action and Next Gen Committees, and also a host for tonight's session. I'm a member of USW Local 5296.
We're intending that our discussion tonight will last about 1 hour, or maybe a bit longer. We're recording this event in the hopes that we can share it afterwards. Let's start off with a land acknowledgement. I'm joining you from territory traditionally shared between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. This territory, like the locations we are all joining from, is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are grateful to be able to live and work on this land.
Welcome to Steelworkers Talk Politics. Tonight, our discussion is on engaging hearts and minds, voter engagement, and our union. We'll start off the session with opening remarks from our guest speakers, then open it up to questions and discussion from you. You can ask a question or make a comment by raising your virtual hand. You can raise your hand from the reactions button. And Kevon will be calling on people with their hands up. You don't have to unmute your own mic. Kevon will do that for you when it's your turn and he calls on you. Or you can put your comments in the chat box. We'll get to the discussion shortly after some opening remarks. So put your virtual hands up or fill the chat box. Yellow sheet applies. That means that we can have a discussion with a range of opinions, but we must keep things respectful.
Tonight, we're having a chat and discussion on engaging hearts and minds, voter engagement, and our union. And we have a lot to talk about. What is populism and how does it affect our union and union members? The importance of union members engaging in the political process and appealing to those who feel left behind by politics. In addition to our guest speakers, we have members of the Political Action Committee in this session who are collecting ideas to take back to the committee for action and further planning. When we get to this discussion, don't be shy, but please be respectful and please get your questions into the chat box or raise your hand.
Our first guest speaker joining us tonight is Matthew Green. Matthew was recently reelected to his second term as the MP for Hamilton Centre in Steeltown. Prior to his election, as a member of Parliament in 2019, he was an elected Hamilton City Councillor from 2014 to 2018. He comes from a community organizing background and is a progressive voice on the environment, decent housing, and known for his advocacy opposing police carding and racial profiling. Matthew, welcome to Steelworkers Talk Politics. Get us started on the topic by providing your perspective on how we can appeal to those who feel left behind by politics.
That's a great question. Just to be clear, how much time do I have for opening remarks? I got my timer here so as not to fall victim to the politician's microphone privilege here.
Can you take 5?
5 is good. Okay, perfect place to start. So for those who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I see a lot of really friendly, smiling faces, familiar faces on this call today. It was very important that I got a chance to check in. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I know that this is, a really important time and a really important discussion coming out of this election. But I'll just share with you quickly kind of my story and how it probably relates to this. For those of you who are not familiar with Hamilton, we are, the USW heartland of the country, very proudly, with just an incredible history and legacy of not just unionism, but the connectivity between community and grassroots and trade and labor unionism, which is a model, I think, that we can really take a deeper look at. And I see my brother from another mother, Darren Green, on the call, Dennis Van Meer would know very well, and all the others who have had the opportunity to come through Hamilton and just see what that's all about. I want to just talk a bit about, from my perspective as a candidate, ways in which your participation impacts and influences our trajectory in elected office. And I want to take it back to 2014, probably even before that, 2010, when I decided to, finally was in a situation prior to the housing crisis that we're in, buy a home. And I happened to buy a home on a street in downtown Hamilton, across from this really charismatic, and jovial guy named Jake Lombardo, who I had as my neighbor for the better part of a decade. And who, you know, is one of the most, remains, even in his retirement, one of the most politically active people in the city of Hamilton in terms of the work that we do within our party and within the community. This is a guy who shows up. And he had thought about running municipally. And when I told him that I was looking at running as well, it didn't take him long and hard to think about it before he made that room and thought that, you know, not only was he not going to run, but he was going to come on and wholeheartedly support my candidacy as a municipal city councilor going into the 2014 election. And that doesn't happen often. It's not often the case that people with the kind of community roots that Jake would have step aside for, you know, a young progressive at the time. I would have been in my early 30s, not really party affiliated at that time. And he made that room. And in doing so, opened up a whole world. Like, my father was an iron worker, my grandfather was an iron worker, but I wasn't connected in the ways in which, you know, Jake was about to connect me. And in doing so, had the opportunity to meet stalwarts in our community like Lena and Bob, who I see on the call tonight. Again, you know, both solid steel workers, and Darren and Dennis. People who I would get to know as USW, you know, trade unionists, but then later on as neighbors, friends, and comrades on the frontline struggles of not just labor issues in the city of Hamilton. And I can't stress enough how important this is. These folks were fighting for issues that relate to our communities, our neighborhoods across so many different spectrums. And having that backing, that belief in my early years, I think helped put me to where I am today. So I want to just begin by saying thank you. That when you show up for candidates in your communities and believe in them and endorse them in the way that Darren did me in my years here in Hamilton, and Jake and many others, having that belief and the institutional support of your locals and your union is so incredibly important and has such a profound impact on people who will go on into elected office. We have certainly been on the front lines of many struggles in Hamilton. I talk about how we're a relational city, that the politics here are deeply rooted in relationships, so that when, you know, the workers are on the front lines of MANA, I always share this story. One of the most Hamilton experiences I've ever had in my life was underneath the Burlington Street Bridge, you know, listening to a punk band in support of those MANA workers on the front lines of decade struggles that have been happening in this country. That what we're seeing across the country, we saw here in Hamilton first, because we have always been the canary in the coal mine. And that solidarity matters. And when it comes to heart and minds, the truth is, the honest to God truth is, that unfortunately there's been a shift away from the working class issues, the issues that will help improve the material conditions of your members and also members who are non-organized. And I'll share with you that, you know, I had the privilege when Jen Hassan was with you all to have a group of people come and visit me in Hamilton City Hall. I'm not sure, Jordan, if you were in that group or not, but I think there was a cohort of people who came to Hamilton and talked about these very issues. And, you know, your presence in between elections also matters. The lobbying you do matters. I know sometimes it's tough. And you know, when I talked about Jake Lombardo, there's that storied experience that he had visiting Bob Ratina here in Ottawa, you know, where he was basically thrown out, and he had some some pretty sharp words for Jake Lombardo as well. Well, you know, as a follow-up to that story, I'll share with you that Bob fell about a month short of collecting his pension when he no longer is an MP in Ottawa. So that's the karma coming back to bite him. But look, this panel discussion we're about to have here, I can't stress enough the urgency that we have at every level of government, by the way. Municipal politics matter. They might not matter for your collective agreements or CCAA, but they matter on the material conditions of your membership. Housing affordability, social services, all these things are crucial and they matter. And that's going to happen in Ontario coming up here in this next little while. Provincially, I see my comrade Jamie West, who you couldn't find a better voice in labor on this call today, right? We're going to have a dogfight in Ontario in this next provincial election. And it is going to require the boots on the ground of the frontline rank and file workers of USW, and in fact, all affiliates in the House of Labor to come together and finally elect a Labor Party to represent the working class issues of Ontarians. And I'll tell you this, and I'll close with this. 2 years comes and goes very quickly in the House of Commons. Nothing changed in this election. So if our history has taught us anything, there is a high likelihood that we're going to be right back in election within the next 24 months. That at some point in time, Trudeau is going to take his long walk in the snow and finally decide that the fiefdom he was trying to create in the House of Commons isn't something that is his God-given and right. So there's a high probability that we'll be back, you know, on those streets, going door to door, street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood. And what I want from what I'm hoping we can get out of this call tonight is a commitment that we'll all go back into our communities and start looking at ways in which we can get ourselves involved electorally, and then building those deep relationships, making sure that we can connect the talking heads of politics in our unions to the rank and file, so that those relationships carry the day and we get people excited in the way in which, you know, I got to give my last shout out to Sean McMullen, who's been delivering signs here in Hamilton Center, sometimes on his own, but those relationships matter. That kind of solidarity matters. And that's why I'm on this call tonight. And I just want to take this moment and appreciate and thank each and every one of you for making time and inviting me to join this space. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you, Matthew. You're a tremendous advocate for your constituents, including many of which were from our union. And that event that you referenced in 2017, where we came to essentially lobby you, that was myself, Jay, who's on this call, Jana, who's a panelist, Jordan, who's my co-host, Seppo, who is you know, my co-chair for PAC. So that was a very formative moment for us as Next Gen. And so thank you, you know, for being involved in that. We also appreciate all the tireless work you do in Hamilton Centre and in Parliament in Ottawa. We do have two more panelists, but before we move on, I do want to recognize a couple of people on the call. So we have with us MPP Jamie West, of course, from Sudbury. Jamie, give a wave. Yes, there's Jamie. We also have Miles Sullivan, assistant to the director, Marty Warren, who is also here on the call with us tonight. So Miles and Marty, give a little wave there, guys. Okay, great. Thank you. So next, our next speaker is our very own Jana Papuckoski. So Jana is the Vice President of USW Local 5296, representing security guards. She is a proud Labour candidate for the NDP in Northumberland Peterborough South in 2018 Ontario election. Jana is also a member of the District 6 Political Action Committee, so she is a very familiar face to many of us here on the Zoom tonight. Jana, welcome to Steelworkers Talk Politics. Could you please build on Matthew's comments and add your own reactions? How can we appeal to those who feel left behind by politics?
Thank you for having us, or having myself. I am just really excited to be here and really pumped after Matthew's introduction there. I guess I'll start with a little bit about myself. I'm a proud steelworker representing security guards. I come from you know, family of unionized members, and I guess my father was somewhat involved in the union, and he was he was new to Canada along with my mother, and my mother wasn't unionized, but I could definitely see the difference between the benefit that there was to having a union, and we definitely saw the difference in how that impacted our family, and the differences in how my parents' work lives were. And so I totally agree with Matthew and everybody here for joining. I mean, this is great that we are here to talk to our members, to get people politically engaged. As the Vice President of Local 5296, I'm doing full-time like steward duties and talking to our members about a variety of issues about their rights related to employment law or outside of it, and what's in our collective agreement. And we have a very precarious type of working environment, a lot of new Canadians. And so I am able to sympathize from my own experience in watching my parents as new Canadians and in learning English and struggling in their work and just trying to get by. I see that with our members, and I can absolutely I feel like I can put myself in those shoes and be able to help them, like a lot of children of immigrants have to help their parents get sort of acquainted here in Canada and help navigate things when everything, including like the English language, is new to you. In terms of appealing to people, obviously we're here. I'm a proud NDP supporter. I try to educate our members about that. Like I try to put myself in their shoes and then sort of see where they're coming from, and then provide an education piece in terms of why they should get involved, what politics has to offer them, why it's important, and explain that our collective agreement is one set of rules, but there's a lot more that a government can do. And why, for example, like the NDP would have policies that would actually speak to working people, and I can't convert everybody, but I try to meet people where they are, because people have whatever experiences that they're coming from, and I want to be able to not push things on them. I think that scares people away and makes them uncomfortable. You need to find where they are and then provide that sort of education piece and relate to them. And I try to do that with our members. And where I am at, like I ran provincially in 2018, so I'm known, in my community as an NDP person, and so I will get questions about politics. So I try to field those in an approachable sort of way. Yeah, I think I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Jana. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Okay, Brandon.
yeah,
take over.
yeah.
Or Brandon, sorry. Jordan, over to you.
All right, thanks, Bree. Thanks, Jana. So our third guest tonight is no stranger to Steelworkers Talk Politics, as he joined us a year ago for our session, Taking on Trump. We'd like to welcome Brandon Tozzo. Brandon is a lecturer at Trent University in Peterborough, where he teaches methodology, U.S. politics, and international relations. He also works for the Ontario Public Service and is president of OPSEU Local 468. We're going to open this up to Steelworkers for discussion in just a moment, so please get your questions or comments in the chat box or raise your virtual hand. But before we do, Brandon, could you please take us back to the beginning? Tell us about how you would define populism and how it affects unions and our members.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'd like to give a shout to Matthew. I think I still have your mother-in-law's face mask that I got from you for one donation. Has a big NDP logo. And thank you for Steelworkers for having me back again. Clearly, I didn't do that poorly last time. So when we get down to what we're really talking about today, and sort of situating the nature of the debate, is, what is populism, and then we'll to sort of talk about the theme of this debate and problems with and when we don't actually engage people. So populism writ large is a really contested definition. It's really just the people versus a perceived elite. Now, that elite can be economic, that elite can be a political elite, as we've seen at times during this pandemic. It can be a perceived scientific elite. That elite can be real. That elite can be the actual people who we don't like in Ottawa. It can be a conspiratorial elite, but it's generally a perceived us or the people versus something above and beyond us. And I think what we can take from this definition and this idea, and speaking to what our two speakers have really talked about before, when we're talking about how to engage people, it really becomes an issue of how do we engage with people to create a broader us, and how we properly define who the appropriate them is. We've seen them be used to attack people who shouldn't be attacked. We've seen it in the past year or two be used to attack scientists, doctors, hospital workers. But we've also seen, on the other hand, it being used in the appropriate way. We've seen what happens when the right people define that term appropriately: labor activists, union activists, people who are working on behalf of actual people, and really get a lot of things done. So we've seen this with our federal NDP holding Trudeau's feet to the fire and getting good social programs in response to the pandemic. We've seen it where it's used inappropriately in the United States, where they've ignored public health measures and demonized vaccinations. We've seen it done well in the United States, where we see AOC and the squad really hold the feet to the fire of Joe Biden and try to get some things out of them. So populism is a big, broad term. And it's really about how we then take that idea and engage with people. How do we do that? And this is going to come from an academic. We don't talk to people using academic language that alienates people. We talk to them where their hearts and where their minds are. We have to engage with people on an emotional level. We have to talk using their same language. I'm a son of a guy who worked in a factory, and I often still find I talk like a son whose dad worked in a factory and not like an academic. That gives me some very interesting teaching evaluations when I curse regularly in class. But that is how I roll, and that's who I am. And I engage with people a lot better that way, because I'm not talking at them, I'm talking to them. Another thing for anybody who follows me on Twitter or anywhere else is I use humor. Humor is a great way to get engaged with people, because you're getting at them. You're actually talking and speaking their language, and you're engaging with them. I think if we as labor activists really want to create a populist movement, we have to the facts are on our side. Places that have stronger labor and union movements are better. They respond better to crisis, they respond better to recessions, and there will be other ones. And mark my words, they will respond better to this climate crisis coming. You can probably look country for country. What we need to do is we need to talk to people, we need to engage with them, we need to use humor, and we need to show up. That's one thing Matthew said that I really want to touch upon. Decisions are made by people who are at the table. We need to be at that table. Thank you.
Awesome, Brandon. All very, very spot on points. Well done. And now, Steelworkers, we'd like to get to your questions. So I'm going to call on Kavan and ask if we have anyone who's raised their hands right now.
Thanks, Jordan. And before I start, let me say good evening to everyone and welcome to the panelists. Jordan, I am surveying a couple screens here to see if any hands are raised. I know Steelworkers could be shy in the beginning, so I think they're shy right now. I don't see any hands raised.
I'll raise mine.
I do see one. I see Marty's raise his hand. Go ahead, Marty. You've unmuted yourself, taken my privileges away, but go ahead and ask your comment.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I'll try to be brief and not, as a union leader, take over the conversation. But, we talk about populism and how do we get our issues up front? And what I find is sad. Well, first of all, let me say the only way, in my opinion, we build back better, we save the society, we recreate the middle class, whatever that may be. We make wages, or we have wages that are affordable, or through unionization. That's how it was built in the 60s and 70s and early 80s. That's how society was built. For some reason now, many politicians have a problem to say the word union or labor movement unless they're in a union hall or on a picket line. But I do appreciate Joe Biden, who, if you see him, he'll tell you how he's going to build back the US is through a strong labor movement, through union jobs, good paying jobs, jobs with pension plans. And that all comes around to the point I'm making is why is it important to be involved and be a voice at the table? Because an example, Amazon is coming in. Well, they're already into our country in big time. They don't pay they're worth billions of dollars. They just opened a place in Cambridge, Ontario. Everybody went off. Yay, Amazon's coming. They don't pay a wage where you can own a home, raise a family, retire in dignity. The only way they're going to pay those wages is through unionization. And that's my point, and especially with the green economy coming, the new economy, all this work that's going to be with batteries, we hear rumors of jobs of 5,000 people again, facilities with 5,000 people working to produce batteries. But if they're not unionized jobs, my question is, will they be jobs that really pay the tax base, add to the community, own a home, send your kids to school, stuff like that? So how do we make organizing legislation? How do we make the union movement popular?
Well,
Is that an open? Is that open?
Yeah, no, I think it is, Matthew. And to add to that, Marty, that actually echoes something that we discussed during our PAC meeting, in that the union recently has taken on the face of we've always been for social justice. And now with, Trumpism and the rise of like right-wing populism, those movements have become significantly less appealing to some of our members. And so now not only do we have to win the hearts and minds on the labor front, but also on the social justice front, because, suddenly you're a cool rebel to think like, oh, I'm not going to allow that pride symbol to be put on the same page as my union logo. So just going on with that, like labor is really facing kind of an attack on both sides by this right-wing populism. So Matthew, Brandon, Jana, we'll open it up.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to right-wing populism is a left-wing populism, and one that is very explicit about improving the material conditions of workers and working class people. And I would say that, having watched the retail sector begin to organize indigo chapters, the cannabis sector, there's a generation who have been basically given one of the most precarious job markets ever in the history of this kind of a capitalist system. And I think that they are awakening to their rights in ways that have a profound opportunity for organized labor. And that is the challenge, is to extend beyond, end of contracts, open bargaining sessions, and starting to get into unorganized people and the culture of rating, reestablish what solidarity looks like in the House of Labor. And I think that USW is a great example where that can happen. Quite frankly, here in Hamilton, we've watched that erosion happen. We had Bain Capital come in and take Hamilton Specialty Bar. There was an opportunity there. We could have taken over that factory and kept production. Is it radical? Yeah. But I think that we need to have within our legislation the first right of refusal, so that if a company wants to go bankrupt and not be a going concern, then it is absolutely the case that the workers should be able to take over production. We need to start talking about sectoral bargaining, so we don't go franchise to franchise on the retail side and have to fight every fight against the Walmarts and the Indigos and the big giants. And for those that were tuned in last week, or this week, I just did something on W5 about Amazon. They're a goddamn pariah. Bezos is set to be a trillionaire. That's fucking obscene. I do apologize to Lena. I said I wouldn't swear again. in a thing. I did get in trouble for that as well, Brandon, the last time. But what is obscene is the fact that he's a trillionaire, not the F word.
If I could just add to that, I would say, like, what we are seeing with the rise of right-wing populism, and to touch upon what Matthew has said, is that's a response to a failure of left-wing liberals. Like, it's a failure of liberals to be able to talk to people, to be able to respond to their issues. I interviewed the people who voted for Trump, and some of them, you can't get past, like, they have pretty insidious views. No, liberals aren't left wing. That is quite correct. But I'm talking about sort of like liberal movements within the United States, like Barack Obama and that sort of centrist, whatever you call that. What I would argue is where you're seeing a real rise of it in other countries is really where liberals have come in and tried to promise meeting capitalism halfway and not actually providing tangible goods. They're kind of just milquetoast ways of dealing with it. So the sort of Barack Obama method, and a lot of the people who've risen in France, as well as through the presidential system, they haven't really resolved these kinds of issues. What I really heard in the United States for people in the labor movement who voted for Trump was they had tried Democrats and gotten lied to. They tried Republicans and gotten lied to, and Trump didn't seem like any one of those. People become right-wing populists when they're desperate, when they have no other alternatives, when their jobs have been gutted. That is really, I think, what we have to prevent, is this sense of despair and also a sense of hope. Because these same people who voted for Trump, at least when I did my research in Ohio and the Midwest, these people would have voted for Bernie. Like, they would have voted for Bernie first before they would have voted for Trump. But Trump was not Hillary Clinton, who was just more of the same. Trump promised to break the system. Well, when your option is between nothing and breaking something, you vote to break it, right? And that's where I think the left can move in, is really just say, no, we have these ideas. We know we have tangible things that can help you. We have policies that can actually make a change in your life. Like, that is what I think most people are looking for. Some people you can't touch. Some people are just, they're unreachable. But I don't think that's most people.
Okay, awesome. So we're really getting into the discussion right now. We are aware we've got some hands up and some questions in the chat. I just want to ask Jana if she wants to give her point of view on what Brandon and Matthew raised.
Yeah, sorry, my internet was unstable there. It popped out for a second, but I would agree in terms of in the way that we talk to people. I think I try to infuse, from my own personal experience, I try to infuse humor and I'll make jokes about when people say, I don't want to vote for the NDP or the Liberals. They're going to raise my taxes or whatever. Or the NDP wants to tax the rich, and I'm rich, and I'm like, oh, okay, how rich are you? And poke fun at that. People are generally not aware of what the policies are, or aware of, that they're working class. They're not going to be affected by some of the policies or some of the features that they're going at. They're actually going to be a benefit if we're going to invest in public services and programs. They would actually be at a benefit, and they can't get past, I guess, these old the old inferences about left-leaning politics or progressive politics. So, okay, I'm okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenna. Great points to all. Let's see, we've got some hands raised. I'm just going to call on Kavan and see if we've got a speaker.
Thanks, Jordan. We have Dylan with his hands raised. Dylan, I'm going to unmute your mic, so go ahead and give your comment or ask your question. Once you are finished, you say that's it, and we'll know that you're finished. Go ahead and ask your question.
My concern revolves around, are we even approaching this the right way? Because it seems to me that one of the big questions is trying to come up with rational arguments and assume that the people we're trying to reach are rational actors, when in fact their biggest issues that I see on the left is that many of the folks who are trying to engage in politics approach, particularly those who are trying to design policies, specialize in fields that are about, designing, political science or political theory. A lot of the people who do get involved in right-wing politics tend to be advertisers. I think what we need to do is revolutionize our rhetoric, because I just noticed, like, the old, well, unions are a canary in a coal mine. That's great when you're trying to appeal to people who are already members of labor unions who value them. But there are some within my own union who do not value that. I don't know why we have those people. They don't do anything for me, et cetera, et cetera. And people outside of labor unions tend to view them as simply looking out for their own. We can point to all the empirical evidence in the world, cite the studies and citations and values chapter and verse, but how do we actually shape our language in ways to win people over using the language of sales? That's all I have to say for now, I guess, but I question our ability to just try and approach this like a rational actor theory.
Okay, who wants to take a crack at that question?
Well, I feel personally attacked by that academic argument. So if I could perhaps take a jab, if my other two counterparts wouldn't mind. So
just for the record, Brandon and Dylan know each other from outside. Like,
yeah.
So
Thanks,
cool.
Thanks, Dylan.
Cool.
Thanks very much. You got me right here. Yeah, and this is, I think, I don't think the left is unaware of the fact, and leftist parties are unaware of the fact, like, people don't read platforms. I always love hearing what people say that they want to hear and what they vote on. Like, oh, I read the platform. Nobody reads all these bloody long platforms. That's just not how people, no one has the time. Largely, it's party affiliation and leadership, and sometimes local candidates, at least if we look at political science. And I think what you've touched upon is we are not unfamiliar with this. How many people have heard Tommy Douglas's story of Mouseland? He's not talking about real mice. Like, this isn't an empirical argument that he's making. The left can make these arguments. Some of the most passionate speakers are leftists, because I think the left needs to be inspired. I think the right is confident with people like Stephen Harper and Aaron O'Toole. They're fine with middle managers because that's what they want. They just want a middle manager to be their leader. I think the left, we actually are good at that when we find the right person to be articulate and to speak passionately and emotionally. Our ideas aren't hard or complicated. I don't think we assume people are rational actors. I think we just have to be able to get people who can communicate well to be our leaders. And I think that we do have that. Like, the left is actually, if you look at the history of the NDP and members of the NDP, we have some really great talent on the benches. And I'm going to be an academic. I reject your premise, sir. I think that we actually do a decent job at it. We can always do better, but I don't think we need to just abandon and say, oh, the left is just filled with a bunch of nerd brainiacs. You're not all me, thankfully. There actually are some very passionate, articulate speakers, and I think we do need to get a better job of communicating to people. And that, I think, is something that we could perhaps talk about in methods and tactics. That's all I got to say about it.
All right. Thank you very much, Brandon. We're going to go to Kim now and see if we've got anyone who's from the chat box got any questions you'd like to contribute.
Yeah, we have a couple of people. I'm going to read the first one, but I do hope we get time to come back because there's some other questions too. But very early on, Jay asked, the rich are just getting richer, but everyday people look up to them as achievers. So it's aspirational. And how do we change that narrative?
One of the things I found really effective is communicating this scale of wealth, because I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around $1 billion. And I always try to go back to hours times wages and the difference between earning a wage and making money from capital. Everybody thinks that they're capitalists, but the reality is they're not. that very few people in this country are actually capitalists. Most people make their money in an hours times wage scenario. And when you start to give people perspective about how many hours it takes to make $1 million or $1 billion, you know, when you start to get into those big numbers, I think that they can get the general unfairness of the economic system. So when we talk about economic fairness and tax fairness, or when we talk about having a democratic economy, I mean, anybody, and you know, we can talk about rejecting the premise of the question. In Hamilton Center, I don't have to tell anybody anything. I find my most effective communications just asking them basic and sequential questions about what they believe to be fair, right? And what their ability is to work hard and to get the things that their parents got or their grandparents got. Like, that day is gone. And so for me, it's all about like the Socratic method here in Hamilton and having those conversations with people where they don't have to feel judged because they're coming to conclusions that are obvious. It is obvious that in a city like Hamilton, the government gives $400 million to ArcelorMittal Dofasco, right? Didn't come to the table with US Steel, but you got Mittal from ArcelorMittal Dofasco, who spent $60 million on his daughter's wedding. And when we start to look at where money goes and flows and what fairness looks like, I just have to ask somebody, like, do you think the government should be, you know, giving monies to corporations and not the workers when those same corporate CEOs are spending $60 million on a day? And it doesn't take a PhD for people to come to those conclusions really quick. And that's why, like, the plainer you can speak with people, the better, in my opinion. They don't care about the policies, by the way. I've knocked thousands of doors in my city. They want to know, is this person listening to me? Will they fight for me? That's what they want to know when they're electing new Democrats. And so, you know, that's the challenge I would put to everybody on the call, is like, when you're out there and excited about something, you don't even have to sell it. You don't even have to tell it. Just ask the questions that will allow people to come to their own realization. And even I've had these conversations with pretty far right-wing people. I got on the door with PPC. And when we got to the end of it, like, I was like, what you're describing is not libertarianism, it's socialism. And they were like, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, well, go do some more look at that platform and come back to me and let me know if what they're saying actually represents who you are. So that's the challenge for us, is just to listen more, get those questions going, and allow people to come to their own discoveries about what is basic fairness. I got a 5-year-old son, and he can drop what's fair and what's not fair when it comes to our economy.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Matthew, for that insight. I just want to remind everyone, we do want you to come in and participate, and feel free to raise your hand if using the button there, and we'd be glad to have you feature your questions with our guest panelists tonight. Right now, though, I'm going to throw it over to my co-host, Briana, for the next question for our guests.
No, that's
yeah.
great.
I have a question.
Oh, okay. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. My question in this coming. My name is Dimitri. My question. This coming provincial election. How strong our labor unions solidarity to beat the Dagford government, because since Dagford came in power, he reduced all the minimum wage from the cutting wins she provided for $15 to $14, and that's a slap for the labor union when he won in power. And I remember during Mike Harris' solidarity strike, we have a slogan: organize, educate, and resist. Is there any alternative idea or strategy for my question to Comrade Jana? How to make it our union to make this strategy strong, to make back in power, like during what's the name, the premier in the NDP, Broderick. Is there any chance that we will be back in power again in Ontario? Thank you.
I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, no, thanks for your question, Dimitri. But I'm proud to be a steelworker because we're unabashedly NDP supporters, and in our local, we advertise, we talk about the issues, we put it in the newsletter, we put it on our website, we mass text our members, and we're trying to educate. And at the same time, I'm not, I try to meet people where they are, and try to hear where, you know, I'll get into phone battles with people when we do this you know, outreach and whatever. And what I found is that for most people, they're actually quite they might seem really right wing until, you know, you show that you're empathetic, and that you actually want to, you know, show them facts, and that you don't want to just dismiss them and their feelings or their beliefs. So I think I am really hoping that we can make huge gains and in the next election. But I think education and relating to people and trying to bring them down from that peak of like anger and come down. I think, like Matthew had said, people don't want to know the policies. They want to know maybe how things are going to affect them. What the facts are, but they want to know that the people who are representing them are actually going to care and be listening to them. So this is what I'm trying to do, at least with our membership, right? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
I always say this, you know, I was on a call with Unifor not too long ago, and I think it's an important thing that bears reminding, that being in proximity to power is not the same as having it. And sometimes I'll say this in plain talk. It's not coming for you, but I think we can draw the connection here. That sometimes in the House of Labor, public sector unions, private sector unions, ones who want to play a game of being in proximity of power will lose their solidarity with other people for the moment because of the business of unionism and not the work of solidarity within trade unionism. And so, you know, it is absolutely the case. You know, I look at, if you were to have a minister of labor on this call right now with Jamie West, like how better would Ontario be? That's what's at stake right now. That is absolutely what's at stake, because the government consists of who's around that table. Liberals announced their cabinet today, right? And I challenge you to point to somebody on that, around that table, who's labor friendly, truly labor friendly. And so I'll just say that when you're talking to people in other affiliates to your district labor councils, having that fight to ensure that there is solidarity from the grassroots up within those affiliates, fighting that good fight. I know I'm preaching the choir here because you're one of the few that actually do it without having to, you know, explain why, because it's that obvious that we know Canadians are better served when Jamie West is the Minister of Labor provincially. That's just a fact. And you're not going to get that out of liberalism. And you sure as hell will not get that out of any form of whatever kind of jaded conservatism that they're trying to start to now talk to working class people. The reason why Aaron O'Toole is trying to talk to working class people is because they've done the analytics and the surveys and the polling to know what's about to come out of this moment in austerity. And they know that the working class is going to carry these next couple of governments, because people are starting to wake up to what's at stake through COVID, that even people who thought they were middle class, that were a paycheck away from not being able to pay their bills, are in deep and dire circumstances, and they're going to look for answers. And on our side, when it comes to your rank and file, it's incumbent on the NDP to present and communicate policies that are explicitly labor-driven policies. So when I talk about sectoral bargaining, you know, first right of refusal, ending CCAA, you know, having those types of adequate bargaining rights, because Marty's absolutely right. Organized workplaces are democratic workplaces, the only democratic workplaces in this country, and we need more of them. So that's our shared work.
No, thank you, Matthew. I think you are completely right that unions who have sold their soul for power, or as you say, proximity to power, that has never served their members of their own union or anyone else's. So no.
Can I just interject with one thing definitionally? Because I think Jamie keeps bringing this up, and I think it's worth talking about, is like the liberals and liberal, like that sect is not left. So when we refer to those terms, I'm sure everybody here knows it, but I'd be remiss as a pointy-headed lecturer if I didn't point out the fact. So liberals may self-identify as being on the left. Leftism is not, or at least the social democratic movement, that is not that. That is not what that is. Leftism is incremental sort of tailoring with capitalism. The left is socialism, is still trying to promote a social democratic society. And I think it's important that we parse out those terms. So I think I said left liberalism earlier, Jamie, and I wanted to just clarify that that's what they self-identify as, but their actual policies are much more tailoring towards the needs of capitalism. So thank you. Just wanted to clarify that.
No, thanks, Brandon. Okay, so I see we have a hand raised, but I also believe that we have some questions in the chat that have been sitting for quite a while. So Kim, could we get a question from the chat?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two actually. So Dave wants to know whether we should use working class or middle class. And I have an idea about that, but anyway, let's have the panelists ask that or talk to that. And then secondly, Lori asked, how do we break through ridings where it's a fight between the NDP and Conservatives, and particularly in ridings where there's a large cohort of union members, such as Oshawa and Windsor in the recent federal election, where those both went, two ridings went Conservative and not New Democrat.
Okay, so the first question was what, Kim? Can you repeat that?
It's about language use, working class or middle class.
Okay, yeah. So first question, working class versus middle class. What language do we want to use? And second question is, how do we convince NDP Conservative switch voters to vote NDP? So working class versus middle class. Who wants to go for that one?
Pick me.
Matthew, okay.
Yeah, the middle class is a mythology that liberals cooked up to put one segment of workers against another segment of workers. I will reiterate, if you are working hours times wages for a paycheck, including salaries, you are working class, period, point blank. That this government had such contempt for working people that they created a ministry for the middle class prosperity. And here's the kicker. Here's the thing that should punch you in the gut. They had the audacity to say, the middle class and those working hard to join it. The audacity. So I challenge everybody to get this idea of middle class. And I know it's tough because it's a generational thing, because a lot of people work very hard in labor to get the wages that in the 80s and 90s were considered middle class. But come against one strike mandate, come against one ripple in the economy or free trade or a change of legislation. And if you're a paycheck away from not being able to pay your bills, or worse, if you're in a scenario, not worse, but equally as bad, if your paycheck has been eroded because of the astronomical cost of living, or your pensions have been sold out through CCAA, guess what? You're working class. And the sooner we can get away from the mythology of the middle class, which then puts this complete mythological separation between people who have some form of work and others, unorganized versus organized, blue collar versus white collar, the better, in my opinion. The absolute better. So let's abolish that and let's attack it when we hear liberals talk about it, because when liberals talk about middle class, remember, they define it as people who make north of six figures, two and a quarter, something like that, something ridiculous like that. So we need to be very clear about this language and unapologetic when talking about working class people.
Okay,
and I see
Brandon.
conservatives, who roll up to me in Hamilton and say, oh, you're a good guy. I like your fight. You're with the wrong party. And I'm like, oh, don't tell me you're a liberal. They're like, no, I'm a conservative. I'm like, you have too much dirt under your nails to be a conservative. I've been to Ottawa. I know what conservatives look like. And they don't look like anybody from my neighborhood. I can tell you that.
So,
You guys got fired up, man.
Here's the funny thing. If you take a look at wealth distribution on a graph and you compare all demographics compared to the 1%, it goes like this, and then you get the 1% and it goes like this. Literally, there is absolutely no difference from a statistical analysis perspective between middle class and working class and poor. The only real difference that you'd see on a chart is the 1.1% who controls so much wealth it is unimaginable compared to everybody else. So literally, Matthew gave a very clear definition of the fact like you're working for a paycheck. I'll just be at that way. If you look on a graph, and I dare you to do this when this is over, like there is really no difference between you, middle class, working class, even upper middle class, and the super wealthy. Like the amount of wealth they have and control they have is just off the charts, literally off the charts. So yeah, I think that we could talk middle class when we talk maybe culture and values, but even then, I think that's just degrees. But from a wealth perspective, it's really meaningless.
Okay, no, thank you. And so Kim's second question that she read out there was, how do we appeal to NDP conservative switch voters? And I think that's a really interesting case study because, I mean, those are the people most, perhaps, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong or not, those are the people most likely to have bought into some form of right-wing populism when they switch from NDP to a conservative vote. Perhaps. I'll leave that to you. Who wants to answer that question? Sure. Yep. Oh, Jana, and then Matthew.
Sorry. I'll just comment on the first question very briefly. I would say working class because despite my parents, English is a second language, they always enforced that we were working class, that we worked. Everybody on our block worked. That was life, and that is what most people have to do. My parents were very much aware of that and never tried to delude themselves into thinking, they did more overtime, that they were somewhat, better off. They were actually working themselves, closer to a grave just to get by. But in terms of sorry, what was the second question about? Sorry.
So NDP conservative switch voters.
Yes, switch votes. When I live in a rural riding, and I talk to a lot of, it's fairly conservative. A lot of people who know sort of where I stand want to sort of pick my brain. And, I think I just by having an honest conversation with people and showing them that we're not some kind of demon, and I'm not trying to erode whatever social values they might have or tax them to death. I think that has sort of warmed people up and at least to be more friendly and less off-putting and standoffish when they would approach me when I was either as an NDP candidate or even thereafter as being that person in the neighborhood with the orange sign. I was more, approachable, and I could answer the question, things that they might not want to talk to other people about, because there might be some sort of shame about looking at other parties and, looking around at other options. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would suggest that, and this is tough, right? Like people are gonna feel a ways about what I'm about to say. We're a regional party. All parties are basically regional in this country, and they shift from which regions, when and how. And if you were to look at the West Coast, if you were to look at places like Alberta, places where they don't actually have provincial liberal strong party representation, then it is the case that oftentimes you'll have that orange blue switch. And we see that a lot on the West Coast, and we do see that in our rural areas. And look, there was a significant anti-Trudeau sentiment. People felt left out from supports. People still feel in this populist moment that there is an elite power hold on this country, because they're right. There's a dynastic politic that feels like it has the divine right to govern and governs that way. And I think our work, respecting the fact that all politics are identity politics, but the fundamental issue you have in organizing is knowing who your people are. And we can't forget that 60 years ago, the CCF and the CLC came together with farmers, in the Stanley Knowles era, that fought for these working class issues. And there needs to be a return to that legacy within our party and our identity that is explicit in who we're supporting. because I'll share with you the big corporate farms that are buying up all the small, or the hidden poverty in rural areas that nobody wants to talk about. Those are significant issues that we need to speak to in deeper ways. But we also, and this is a comment that went there, we can't ignore the role in white supremacy within right-wing movements. It is an age-old common scapegoat. It is so simple to do that rather than point our fingers at the corporate class, it is sometimes the case that working class will point their fingers at the other, whoever it might be. So buckle in as we, tiptoe in this impeding Cold War against China, the ongoing vilification of Muslims and others, new Canadians, that we have to start to deconstruct white supremacy within our own workplaces in a way that doesn't leave people feeling alienated and recognizes the need to improve their material conditions as workers.
Okay, thank you. So we are at 8 o'clock. I know, I'm just trying to, if I can get just a read on the panelists here. We said we would book you guys for an hour. Are you guys good? Can we go for one more question maybe? Or do you guys have a hard stop?
No hard stops here, and I took up a lot of time, so I'll sit this one out and just listen.
Okay, because I know Brad has his hand up, and then I just saw Chris motion that he wanted to ask a question, and I think, Chris, that had to do with Matthew's comment on white supremacism. So Kavan, could we maybe unmute Chris Ramsey, and then we'll go to Brad for a very quick question.
Okay, 1 second, let me find where Chris is on my screen. I kind of muted Brad. But there's Chris.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Chris. You're keeping me on my toes. Chris, your mic is unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Right. Okay, thanks, guys. Chris Ramsey. I'm local 4610 out of Cambridge, second generation steelworker. I just want to say, the comments that we've been hearing, and I don't understand why it takes so much effort to educate people, because all of these, you can ask every one of these people who jumped on the Trump bandwagon. You ask them if they ever did their research to see what a scumbag the guy was before he actually came out talking like he was for the people. Ask him about his record of his collusion to stop blacks from having property in New York, from stop blacks from buying property in New York, and things like that. Like, it's same thing here in Canada. You have the ones who have dropped out of the Conservative Party to join the PPC party with the objection that they wanted to have something different, but they talk the language that they want you to be a part of it. But when you dig deep and see in their rallies and stuff, as we were saying before at our meeting last time, a lot of it's anti Semitic. It's a lot of it is racist. A lot of it is sexist, bigotry. So I don't know how you get people to stay away from that stuff or educate them, because you can talk all you want to people. I think deep down inside, there's a lot of people that have anger, and it's not necessarily towards the politicians. I think it's they point it towards the politicians when the politicians are the public figure. But realistically, the anger is not against the politicians. It's against people. It's just against regular people. When they see other people being successful, that doesn't mean necessarily having money or having wealth, but it's just a success of having happiness with their neighbors and the people they live with or work with. A lot of people do not necessarily find that rewarding for them, because a lot of them don't. I mean, they as somebody said earlier, they look up to the people who gain wealth because they see them as elite. They talk about them as elitists, but they also look up to them, right? So my point is, I had a conversation with an older gentleman a while ago, and he said, just look at the first three letters in conservative and see what it says. It says CON, and you can take it from there and figure out what that means, because that's a con. A con will con you into being whichever side he feels that he can get something from you, and that's the truth. Thanks for giving me some time, Kevin. Thank you. Thanks, Bree.
Okay, no problem, Chris. So does someone want to comment on Chris's statement? How true is it that often people's attachment to kind of radical right-wing populist ideas comes from a place of fear of losing something for themselves?
I would argue that's the basis of white supremacy. The white supremacy is absolutely a fear about losing a privileged position within society, even if it means basic equality and equity. And by improving the material conditions of people, making sure they can take care of themselves and their families and have, you know, their costs accounted for in a very uncertain economy, reduces that fear. But let's not like dock around the edges here. Like, it is everywhere, including in our locals, including in our party. It's on the left, it's on the right. How we deal with it and how we cope with it are different things, but they're there. And I think that they're allowed to stay there under all these different guises and trying to explain away what it really is. But, you know, until we can like unpack that and dismantle that, it is the easiest foil for right-wing populism, because they could tap on it like a tuning fork. You ever seen the boom? It's just like this resonance that gets in people where it's like, okay, I'm off the hook for doing the hard work against going after my employer when I can just go after a migrant worker or a temporary foreign worker or a contract worker or whomever else who is other than I am. You know, and I think like that's what we have to start doing, is having those conversations in ways that don't put people on their heels where they dig in and want to double down, because that doesn't get us anywhere, but to bring people along. And that again is also relational. Like I can share with you, I've had very difficult discussions with people who I consider near and dear, both inside labor and outside labor, on some of these issues. And I've watched them evolve, because it takes a kind of emotional labor and patience and compassion for the other person to know that, you know, they can come along.
Okay, no, thank you, Matthew. And I don't know if this is technically correct, and Brandon can tell me later if it is or not, but it seems like left-wing populism asks people to care about other people, and right-wing populism asks people to care about themselves, which is so much easier to do, takes so little effort, right? Which is why it may be harder for left-wing populist ideas to take off in the same way. So I see Brandon has himself unmuted. Can you just hold 1 second? I just want to go to Brad and get his question. And then we'll have some closing remarks, I think. So Brad, go ahead.
Sorry, you can hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Go
Oh,
ahead.
good. So you just sort of touched on what I was going to ask. I was going to say, it seems to me, and having gone through some of this, that the right has managed to weaponize greed. And their two biggest arguments against unions are that, you know, the unions are only in it for themselves, which is, I consider, laughable, considering how much I volunteer and how, you know, it certainly, you don't do it for the remuneration, certainly. And second, you know, whenever the left-wing proposes something like pharmacare, it's always a tax grab. That we can't, you know, that we are so incompetent with money that we always have to ask for it from other people. So, I mean, my question is like, how do you deal with that? How do you take away those trump cards?
Right.
I enjoy that term trump card, because that just speaks to some of the problems, I think. And like, I think one thing we have to contextualize when we're talking about sort of a system of white supremacy that Matthew, I think, quite articulately talked about, is it's not just a system of white supremacy, it's a system of white supremacy built on a system of capitalism, built on a bunch of other historical repression, racism, you know, homophobia, sexism. All these things are built upon each other. And like leftists, we don't have an easy battle, because the right writ large and the forces of status quo and capital, they not only are built upon these foundations and they're there to preserve it. This is not conspiratorial, but the owners of media companies are not left wing. Like, they're there, they have a stake in the status quo. The Post media is not our friend. They're there to keep the status quo and to promote their interests. The banks are there to promote their interests. So when you start talking about racism within the right-wing movement, one of the reasons why it's effective is because there are interests there to make it effective. Like, when I interviewed people in the United States who were pro-Trump, these are people, you know, that were funded largely by right-wing interests to get them engaged. like the Tea Party movement, these anti-government movements, they've got tons of money behind them. Like this is well known that these forces will come to their aid. And it's harder. Like just there are some people you can reach, there are some people you can't. And I think that we have to just sort of realize where energies and efforts will be. But the struggle on the left is always going to be an uphill struggle, because like we're fighting against the man, and the man is in capital quotations, but like we are fighting against the power, like we're fighting against the commanding heights of the economy. Like this is a classic, like it is really, we're not the empowered groups, we're the workers, we're the working class, and the identification of them. And I know we shouldn't use those class terms, and we should more identify as like a cross-class solidarity, but we're working against the interests of that 1% who owns all the capital, who owns the businesses, who owns the media. This is going to be a hard fight and a hard struggle. So it's not, there's no easy solution to any of this. So I don't want to leave you in despair, but I think those little people, every now and again, that person you can bring on board, every now and again, you can make that conversation, every now and again, you win that grievance, and it makes it that much better. And you do win, you do strike a blow against that type of force. So I think those battles are fought every day, and they're fought incrementally, and they're fought one-on-one. Sometimes the victories are big and sometimes the victories are small. They're still worth fighting for. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. All right, so I just want to give one more shout out before we move to close. So Shay Anderson has joined the call with us. Shay comes to us from D3, and he was a minister in Rachel Notley's government and is also a member of Local 1944. So Shay Anderson is here with us. Can you give a wave? There he is, everyone. Thanks, Shay. Okay, Jordan, over to you for closing.
All right, so as we get to end this evening, before we go to closing remarks from our terrific speakers, I do want to just circle back, and I just want to give the floor once more over to our Marty Warren, our District Director of District 6. And Marty, if you could just indulge us with some final closing remarks.
Yeah, sure, thanks. And kind of how I started it, I think it all comes back here in the conversation. You know, I want to thank everybody for participating in our panel, but it really comes down to the distribution of wealth. And how can we affect the distribution of wealth? Quite frankly, I don't think we can legislate it away, but what we can do is elect a government, an NDP government, for example, in Ontario, that will level the playing field when we attempt to organize workplaces, because we know when there's union density, the distribution of wealth is better. As union density dropped over the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the distribution of wealth changed. The rich got richer, and us workers got less fortunate or poorer. So I think it's so important that the trade union movement, organized labor, is the key to fix the economy, is the key for people to carve out a living, a home, and send their children to education. And that comes with legislation. And again, so I just encourage everybody on the call to work their butts off, because the first thing when we have an NDP government in Ontario in June, we hope they make a move, or we expect they'll make a move on organizing legislation so we can level the playing field, so working people have an opportunity to join a union without all the hurdles that are in front of them today. Thanks.
Right on, Marty. Thank you very much for that. Cheers. And now we're going to ask participants to take part in online action. We always close our Steelworkers Talk Politics events with an action everyone can take. So today, let's call for employment insurance reform. Go to the CLC website, that's canadianlabour.ca/campaigns/we-need-ei-reform-now. Don't worry, we're putting it up in the chat box for you so you can click through that. This action refers to the CERB, and we know that the CERB or CRB has ended now, but we still need EI reform. Unions have been pushing for EI reform for years. We know that only 40% of those who pay into EI can access it when they need it. And now we have some final 2 minutes to have each of our guest speakers give us some final thoughts. And I'll call up first Matthew.
2 minutes. I started my thing, but I don't think I stopped it the last time. So look, every time I get into these conversations, it's about a call to action. You guys came because you're interested in ways in which you can get involved in these next cycles. You know, I shout out to Dennis and others who have put their names on ballots. Certainly, you know, Jana and others, that we are better served when more new Democrats are elected. So the question becomes, what conversations are you willing to have in your locals, at your local district labor councils, recognizing that you're full and whole people, that you have identities outside of your unions, in your faith groups, in your community groups. What are you willing to do to get involved in these next cycles that are coming up municipally, provincially, and within 2 years federally? And the best time to get involved is now. Like, the clock is absolutely ticking. There is a sense of urgency. This province and this country are going to be reconstituted coming out of COVID. And the question is, who is going to control that conversation? I want to live in an Ontario with the Premier Horwath and a Labor Minister West. I want to live in a province that takes care of one another. You know, that is a government that is built for people, for the interest of people, and not the ultra wealthy and the elite. They've had their decades, they've had their run, and now that run's come to an end. So thanks again. And I'll just say to anybody who wants to continue the conversation with me, please feel free to follow along on social media, reach out to me directly. Happy to have the conversation. And I just have to say to Lena, I have a donation coming to SOAR for my curse word. So that'll come to you. It'll be a $100 donation, because I probably shouldn't have sworn on the Zoom, but hopefully I can buy myself back from that. Thank you.
Awesome, Matthew. Thank you very much for that. And, but by all means, feel free to drop in your links, your social media links in the chat box. That way everyone can connect with you. Now let's hear some final points from Jana. Jana, go ahead.
Yes, thanks for having me as a panelist. I think what we need to do is have these conversations, I guess, you know, like I am within my my membership and with my neighbors. Working people don't have time to do all this research into platforms or look beyond, you know, these slick politicians, these Trumps or whoever. They don't have time. They need information in a conversation or in somebody that they trust. So if there's people that that might need to have a conversation with you about what the realities of our lives are in terms of in politics and how it can be improved and how they can get engaged and not be cynical. These are conversations that would get us further and hopefully build for next year, 2022, here in Ontario for the NDP. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Jana. And now the final word goes to Brandon. Brandon, you got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
If only I could unmute my mic, which is something I've said way too often the past 2 years. What I will reiterate something Matthew said, that we're really at one of those key points in history where we get to decide what kind of future we want. Okay, we saw like what COVID did to poor working conditions. We saw what it did to long-term care homes. We saw what it did to factories where people were working, keep the economy going. And the interesting part about it is we also saw what good we could do if we want to. We were told it was impossible to send people directly money, and then CURB came. We were told it was impossible to pay PSWs more, and then we did. We were told it was absolutely impossible to get everybody working together and get everybody vaccinated, and then we did. It's amazing what happens when we all work together. It's amazing what happens when we have government that actually works for people. All the things that in the past 40 years since neoliberalism we were told was impossible, we did it. So we're going to have a conversation where forces of conservatism and the liberals are going to come back and say, well, that was nice, it's done, get back to your job and go suffer. We got to go back as the left and say, hell no, we got to take these lessons and we got to learn. We will have a discussion of how we want society organized, and who is at that table will matter. Now is the time to get involved more than any other time in my adult life. So stay active, stay funny, stay frosty, get out there and go talk to your neighbors and go talk to your members. Thank you very much for having me. It's been an awesome experience with USW.
All right, guys, thank you so much. We just have a couple more things to do before we leave. And also, I would like to just say everyone who suffered through my very, very poor explanation of what populism was in the last PAC meeting, Chris, Shannon, Jay, Jordan, I really hope everyone understands now, and that has all been cleared up because we had a professor explain it to us. So I've done my bit. Okay, so right now, everyone, if you could please turn on your video if you can. We're going to take a group shot for social media. And while we're doing that, I'd just like to put a plug out. If you enjoyed the conversation that we've had tonight, or any of the talks that you've been to in the past, please consider applying to the Political Action Committee. You can go to usw.ca/D6PAC, and there's a sheet right there that you can sign up for. And Kim will tell us when she is ready for a picture.
I was
Okay,
hoping for a few more cameras on, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead.
Okay, cameras on, guys. Okay, everyone smile.
I'm just going to do page 2. Hang on. Okay, great.
Everyone's like as still as they can with the smiles, right? Okay, that's great. All right, Jordan, a few final notes.
All right, cool. So some thank yous here. We would like to take the time to thank each and every one of you for joining us here tonight. We really appreciate the time you've taken to be here, and your openness to all the questions and the discussions from steelworkers who wanted to talk about these very important, pressing issues. It's certainly been very productive and an informative conversation for all. We also want to thank all the staff and the committee activists from the D6 PAC for joining us here, and all their hard work and help putting this all together for tonight's online session. And we just also want to have a reminder that we will have our next Steelworkers Online Conference coming up on November the 10th. It's called A Fair and Equitable Recovery. There's no cost to register, so USW locals can send as many members as delegates as they want to. And you can find out more details of that online at usw.ca/events, and you'll find the November 10th event and the link up on that page. Again, it's a fair and equitable recovery. And we'll also post that in the chat as well, so you can visit the link to register. And I hope to see everyone there. And thank you very much once again to everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.